The race for the U.S. Senate for the election of 2010 is shaping up to be an historic one. Senator Chris Dodd is mired in bad poll numbers, and there are some who are wondering if he will meet the same fate as his father, the late Senator Thomas Dodd. In March on this program, I asked Senator Dodd about his father, and right after that I received plenty of emails from some younger viewers who said, hey, who was Dodd's father anyway? Dodd's father was a former congressman and senator from our state, and we have a picture here, the elder Dodd with his son, taken probably in the late 1940s or early 1950s, judging by Senator Chris Dodd's age in this picture. With us today is Dick Ullis. He is a longtime columnist and a retired vice president of news here at Channel 3, and he's actually the founder of this program, Face the State, which back then was known as CT93 and then 94, and then as we reached the 21st century, the name had to come to something
It
more.
was very awkward to call it CT 2000, yeah.
But it's great to see you here today, and we went through all the archives, and with your help, we've been able to uncover some old stuff about Senator Tom Dodd, and it's interesting because a lot of people do not know who he was.
Sure.
And what he did. So let's begin with where he first burst on really the national scene, and that was in 1952 when he ran for the U.S. Senate here in Connecticut, and he ran against another familiar name. Tell us about this race here.
Well, we were talking before, almost everything is traced to Prescott Bush, and Prescott Bush, of course, was the father of George Herbert Walker Bush and the grandfather of George W. Bush, the two presidents, and he was also a senator in his own right from Connecticut, and he also defeated two of our more prominent senators of that era, Tom Dodd and Abe Ribicoff.
And the Bush family, of course, was fairly prominent back then, as they remain today. There aren't too many of them in Connecticut anymore.
Right.
Both of these men, I was reading once that I guess Prescott Bush was mentioned for a national ticket with Barry Goldwater. What about Thomas Dodd? Did he ever?
Tom Dodd in 1968, when I'm sorry, 1964, when Lyndon Johnson ran. He succeeded John Kennedy, of course, in '63. Then he ran in his own right. He wanted to make Hubert Humphrey his vice president, but he also didn't want the press to know about it in advance. So he used Tom Dodd as a decoy. And I remember the TV coverage in Atlantic City, and Tom Dodd was going all over the place with Lyndon Johnson, and the press was speculating that he's the guy who's going to get it, and he named Hubert Humphrey.
Interesting. So from 1952, and then Dodd had a comeback in 1958 when he did finally win a Senate seat. He was nominated here. We have this video from our archives. This is from June 26, 1958. And tell us what we're seeing here.
Well, you're seeing Chester Bowles, who was the outgoing governor of Connecticut, was speaking, and the person next to Bowles there was John Bailey, the state chairman, the Democratic boss of Connecticut for many, many years. And there is Dodd being introduced, coming up with the pipes behind him.
That Irish heritage that the Dodds are so proud of, and here we have Senator Tom Dodd. Let's listen in.
There was one person who I knew was for me last September when I started out to try to win this great honor, and that was my wife. And she, you know, some of my friends said, don't do it, you can't make it. But Grace said, go ahead. And that's really why I started and why I tried. And I knew as well about the Democrats of this state, I thought they'd give me a fair hearing. So for all this, I'm grateful. And I pledge to you a real, energetic, fighting campaign, at the end of which we'll bring one of the greatest victories ever achieved in the state of Connecticut by the Democratic Party.
That's from 1958, the Bushnell Theater. We also have this of soon-to-be Senator Dodd campaigning in October of 1958. Hard to hear.
Oh, very good.
That's fine. You think we're going to do well?
Union-wise, anyway, and state-wise and nationally, I think everything will come out okay.
I'm glad to hear that. Things are not too good here. I understand there are about half as many people working here as there were 2 years ago when I was here, 4 years ago.
Well, it's got foreign competition and domestic.
I know that. Well, I'm going to talk about that for a few minutes here today. So I think these people are interested, and I know the people of Bristol are.
There are some similarities and mannerisms between the current senator and his father, of course.
There are, but you'd never pick them for brothers. The interesting thing there was that was sort of the end of the fedora.
Yes.
The hat went out with John Kennedy a couple of years later when he didn't wear a hat to his inauguration. And of course, you don't see people smoking in TV interviews much anymore and throwing cigarettes away.
Yeah, the reporters were smoking on the job all the time. What kind of senator was Senator Thomas Dodd in his early years?
In all of his years, he was quite different from Chris Dodd. If you wanted to compare him with a Connecticut senator, he'd more like Lieberman than Dodd, more conservative. He first made his reputation as a gun control advocate. He was very, very concerned about guns. When John Kennedy was assassinated, he had a bill before Congress to eliminate people's ability to buy guns by mail order. You could see a coupon in a magazine and buy a gun. That's how Lee Harvey Oswald got his Italian rifle that he used to assassinate the president. So that was his first big crusade. But his main thrust as a senator was an anti-communist. He came up through the World War II era. He was a prosecutor at Nuremberg at the Nazi war crime trials, and he likened communism to fascism, and he was one of the leading, probably in the Democratic Party, he was the leading anti-communist for several years. Right. Go ahead.
Right before the Cuban Missile Crisis, President Kennedy came to Stratford, Waterbury, and New Haven. We have some old film of that, and Senator Dodd's in all the pictures with the president, but he didn't really get along with him, did he?
No, he didn't. In fact, on Cuba, he was highly critical of Kennedy. In fact, there was a song, kind of a parody of a folk song in the era, and one of the lines, it was called "The Draft Dodger Rag." And the singer sang about the fact that he believed in God and Senator Dodd and putting old Castro down. That was the memorable line. And that was Dodd. He was very much against Castro. Of course, his son is much more for an accommodation with Cuba and the other South American countries.
Senator Tom Dodd was reelected in 1964, and then things went south in the late 1960s. We have a picture of him actually at his hearings in the Senate, where he was censured by the U.S. Senate. Tell us about this, Dick. What happened?
Well, he was accused, and the Senate Ethics Committee said he was guilty of diverting campaign money to his personal use. He took campaign money and he spent it for personal reasons. There was a little over $100,000 involved. They said he took $8,000 from a corporation. It was in cash. And he said, well, he should have given it back to him because he thought it came from a bunch of employees of the company, which was legal. Taking a cash donation from a corporation, of course, was illegal then and still is. He was accused of having a constituent give him a car to use for a couple of years. He said, what's wrong with having a friend lend you a car? Well, the Ethics Committee and then the whole Senate, by a vote of 92-5, found that there was something wrong, and he became only the 16th senator in history to be censured.
And the polls show that he was not going to do well in 1970, and we have this clip here where he's actually asked if he's going to run again in 1970.
Senator, I haven't asked you this year, and I know in past times I've asked you about the possibility of what's going to happen in 1970, and I noticed recently that you reacted to a poll that was taken in Connecticut.
Well, I always react to polls.
And I just would like to again affirm what you told me some year or 2 years ago, that you did plan to run for re-election, and that you hadn't changed your mind.
Why don't we get a record, and every time you interview me, just turn it, and everybody will hear it. If there's any way I can say that permanently, you'd do me a great favor if you'd make those arrangements, and we wouldn't waste your time or mine. Is that clear?
That's very clear, Senator. All right, and thank you very much.
Senator Tom Dodd talking to Channel 3's Tom Eaton back in 1967.
And you can see he didn't go out of his way to charm the press.
No, he did not. He did not. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more with Dick Ollis as we talk about the late Senator Thomas Dodd, son of Senator Chris Dodd.